understanding throughout our Congress that they think when they put money into the VA, it takes care of military retirees.
Well, David, speaking of Congress, we have to go now to the House floor. That's all from Washington Journal this morning. The House is in for morning business. We've been watching pictures of the Supreme Court images live from C-SPAN, but now we'll go to the House floor. Thanks for
28, 2012. I hereby appoint the Honorable Greg Harper to act as Speaker this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House on January 17, 2012, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as our nation winds down from its military engagements overseas, it's time for America to do some nation building here at home. A $1.2 trillion investment in rebuilding American roads, bridges, transit, and water systems would create 27 million jobs over 5 years. In the first year alone, the economy would add 5.2 million new jobs and grow by over $400 billion. In the second year, unemployment would be reduced to 5.6%. These are among the findings of the New America Foundation report, The Way Forward. Nearly every expert agrees that America's infrastructure is broken and in need of immediate repair and replacement. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave America a D grade for infrastructure quality and has estimated that $2.2 trillion is needed to bring our nation's infrastructure to good repair. The World Economic Forum ranks the United States 23rd in infrastructure quality. Transportation for America reports that there are 69,000 structurally deficient bridges nationwide, including 2,000 in New York and 99 in Western New York alone. In fact, every second of every day, 7 cars drive on a bridge that is structurally deficient. Dangerous road conditions were a significant factor in 1/3 of all traffic fatalities last year. And Americans spent 4.2 billion hours stuck in traffic due to congestion, costing $78 billion, or $710 for every American motorist. The 1987 collapse of the Schoharie Creek Bridge in New York, killing 10 people, and the 2007 collapse of the Minneapolis Bridge, killing 13 people, are tragic reminders of the human costs associated with deteriorating infrastructure. The economic costs are staggering, too. The United States Chamber of Commerce says that the nation will lose $336 billion in economic growth over the next 5 years due to inadequate infrastructure. One local example, in January, the New York State Department of Transportation closed a crucial bridge in Springville, New York, due to concerns about its safety, and the weeks-long closure was devastating to local businesses. The time to rebuild America is now. Actually, right now. The cost of borrowing money is at a historic low rate. The interest rates on 5-year debt is less than 1%. The Treasury Department is considering negative interest rates, meaning that investors will actually pay the federal government to buy United States debt. The question is not whether to undertake this work. Public infrastructure is a public responsibility. The question is when to undertake this work. The cost acceleration of delaying road and bridge repair increases by 500% after only 2 years. Put simply, a $1 million road repair project today not undertaking will cost $5 million in 2014. A $5 million bridge repair project will cost $25 million in 2014. What's more, a 5-year, $1.2 trillion program would create such robust economic activity that it would generate an additional $600 billion in federal tax revenues. That is to say that our country would be purchasing $1.2 trillion in investment in infrastructure for nearly half off. The United States has spent $76 billion rebuilding the infrastructure of Afghanistan, a population of 30 million people, and $63 billion rebuilding Iraq, a population of 27 million people. Both of these nation-building efforts were deficit financed, and as they took money out of the American economy, actually undermined American economic growth and employment. And for America, a population of over 300 million, the House is considering a 5-year, $260 billion transportation bill, or $52 billion each year for the next 5 years on average, less in any given year than we spent in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Rebuilding our nation's roads and bridges will support private sector American businesses. Construction trade jobs average approximately $70,000 a year, and these jobs can't be outsourced to China or Mexico. I began this morning by talking about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Let me now say something about our returning veterans. The unemployment rate for returning veterans under the age of 24 is an unacceptably high rate of 38%. A good and grateful nation owes it to these veterans to ensure that they return home to economic opportunity. The Department of Defense sponsored a program back in 2002 called Helmets to Hard Hats to accelerate apprenticeship training and job placement for these returning veterans. Helmets to Hard Hats is now a not-for-profit organization working with 15 construction trades and over 80,000 American businesses. Mr. Speaker, it is the right time to make a robust investment to repair our outdated and failing infrastructure. There's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of Americans need to be put to work. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Coble, for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Mr. Speaker, last Saturday evening I was watching the weekly Fox television program entitled Huckabee. Bullying was the featured issue. Bullying, Mr. Speaker, has become a severely significant issue in some schools across our country. Bullies, with limited exception, select their targets or victims in this manner. The victims are smaller in physical stature than are the bullies and are usually younger in years. The victims of bullying, Mr. Speaker, become depressed and embarrassed, resulting in physical and emotional damage. One young lad became so distraught that he died by his own hand. Yes, he took his own life because of the damage that bullying had inflicted upon him. The Huckabee program, in addition to having interviewed a bullying victim and his family, featured as well the director of a recently released movie entitled Bully. I urge you all to see this movie. Mr. Speaker, I want to insist that bullies are punished at their schools by their parents and are prosecuted as juveniles if they are still minors. We should cut no slack to bullies. They deserve no slack. And if exposure could link the bullies to the aforementioned suicide, perhaps that should be pursued as well. Mr. Speaker, this bullying plague must be resolved, but it will be resolved only when the bullies receive the punishment they deserve. I thank the Speaker and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. At this point, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Perlusi, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'm introducing the Puerto Rico SNAP Restoration Act. In 1971, Congress enacted legislation to partially include Puerto Rico in what is today called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, and what was then called the Food Stamp Program. Implementation of the Food Stamp Program in Puerto Rico began in 1974. In 1977, Congress amended federal law to fully include Puerto Rico in the Food Stamp Program so that rules governing eligibility and benefits applied no differently on the island than they did in the 50 states. 4 years later, however, Congress exercised its authority under the Territory Clause and removed Puerto Rico from the Food Stamp Program, electing to provide the island government with an annual block instead. annual block grant. Since 1982, Puerto Rico has used this block grant to administer its nutrition assistance program, which differs from SNAP in a number of material respects. The bill I'm introducing today, which I will seek to include in the 2012 Farm Bill, would reinstate the SNAP program in Puerto Rico in place of the block grant. If this bill is enacted into law, Puerto Rico would join the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and 2 U.S. territories, Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands, as jurisdictions fully participating in SNAP. My decision to file legislation converting Puerto Rico back to SNAP was made after carefully weighing the benefits and costs associated with this conversion. I relied primarily upon an in-depth study prepared by the USDA, which evaluated the feasibility and impact of reinstating SNAP in Puerto Rico. On this subject, as with other important issues that I'm tackling, I have adhered to the principle that it is essential to build a strong evidentiary record prior to taking legislative action. The USDA report is comprehensive and raises a number of important policy questions, but its bottom line message for Puerto Rico is crystal clear. Namely, while there are some trade-offs associated with conversion to SNAP, the benefits of conversion far outweigh the costs. Let me be more specific. Applying certain assumptions, the USDA study found that conversion would increase the number of households that receive nutrition assistance in Puerto Rico by over 15%. An additional 85,000 households would become eligible for assistance under SNAP. Moreover, restoring SNAP would raise the average monthly benefit for participating households by nearly 10%. And instituting equal treatment for Puerto Rico under SNAP would mean an additional $457 million in federal spending for the island each year, over 90% of which would take the form of additional benefits. These numbers reveal a fundamental truth. Because Congress removed Puerto Rico from SNAP 20 years ago, hundreds of thousands of needy children, families, and seniors on the island have received no nutrition assistance at all, or have received far fewer benefits than they would have received if they lived in the 50 states or even in the neighboring Virgin Islands. Accordingly, Puerto Rico's exclusion from this program serves as yet another example of how the American citizens I represent, especially my most vulnerable constituents, are treated unequally because of the island's territory status. Whether I'm fighting to convert Puerto Rico back to SNAP or to increase the island's annual block grant, I strongly believe this is a fight worth making. By ensuring that the neediest of my constituents can afford a healthy diet, we enable them to live a dignified and independent life, which in the long run helps reduce health care costs and takes pressure over other safety net programs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Nunnally, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an important week in the future of our republic. In this Capitol, we are debating and voting on budgets, laying out our visions for how we should handle the spending, taxing, and debt issues facing America in the coming years. Across the street at the Supreme Court, they're debating what, if any, limits can be placed on the federal government's power to regulate under the Commerce Clause of our Constitution. But really, we're talking about the same thing. Do we still live under a federal government of limited, enumerated powers? Do we believe that the source of our government begins in we, the people? Do we believe in liberty? Do we trust people to make their own decisions about their own lives without reliance on or subservience to an all-knowing and all-powerful central government in Washington? Are there limits on what Washington can demand of the citizens that it's supposed to be serving? Republicans believe that the answer to these questions is a resounding yes. The budget put forth by Chairman Ryan and the Budget Committee shows that it is possible for this Congress to offer solutions to the challenges of the modern world that are rooted in limited government, individual freedom, and the Constitution. It is our responsibility to govern, to offer the people an alternative to the do-nothing attitude of the Senate Democrat leadership, or the business-as-usual tax, spend, and borrow budget offered by the President. The arguments being made by the plaintiffs against the individual mandate are that the Constitution is not dead, that there's at least one party in Washington and a majority of the country still believes that the Constitution means what it says, that there are limits on the power of Congress and of the executive branch. I'm energized and hopeful for the future of this great republic as I see these events unfold this week. And I'm reminded of the observation of President Reagan. I hope we once again have reminded people that man is not free unless government is limited. There's a clear cause and effect here that is as neat and predictable as the law of physics. As government expands, liberty contracts. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the clock is ticking here in Congress on the floor of the House, where people around the country would like to be preparing for the next construction season. Indeed, the most important action for the economy, for job creation, for strengthening the livability of our community might well be enacting the Surface Transportation Act. Sadly, so far, the news has not been good. Later today, we debate the House Republican budget, which would slash infrastructure funding to a level less than is required simply to meet obligations for contracts that we've already entered into, people that are building roads and bridges and transit systems. And we have an obligation to them. They're down that path. The budget, sadly, would not even allow the federal government to meet its partnership obligation. There's more bad news as we see the Republicans can't come to grips with what would be required to move the transportation authorization bill forward. Last month, they offered up what has been characterized as the worst transportation bill in history. It was partisan. It was unbalanced. It would overturn 2 decades of transportation reform, undercut transit, and the vital enhancement programs that communities have used to improve the quality of life and stretch their transportation resources. It even attacked bike and pedestrian programs, eliminating safe routes to school for our children. Well, luckily, it collapsed under its own weight. They were afraid to even have a hearing on it before it came to the floor, and then they found out that there wasn't an opportunity to pass it. The support wasn't there in the face of united opposition around the country from people who care about transportation. At the same time, the Senate has given us a balanced and bipartisan bill. 74 members of the other body voted for it and passed it over to us. I would hope that there's time for us to stop playing partisan ideological games with this vital transportation bill. The headlines that the Republican maneuvering has done is an embarrassment to Speaker Boehner, to Chairman Mica, but it's not just to the Republican leadership, but it's an embarrassment to the House. I'm sorry that my Republican friends and colleagues can't seem to agree amongst themselves about a path forward. They cannot get 218 votes for any bill, even the Speaker's proposal. The good news is they don't have to. there are 435 members of the House. If they would work in a bipartisan basis, as we have done in the past, we can stop this short-term roulette. We can give the construction industry, local government, people in the private and public sector the certainty they need for not just this construction cycle, but the next construction cycle. We can put tens of thousands of people to work, bolster the economy, do what Congress needs to do, what Congress has done always until this point. I hope the Republican leadership, before we leave this week, will at least allow the bipartisan Senate bill to come to the floor, to be voted on. I'm confident that a majority will pass and will meet our obligations to keep America moving and the economy growing. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed to the House request to return the papers on H.R. 5, cited as the Protecting Access to Health Care Act. Thank you.
Okay. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All of the above energy is a plan first introduced by House Republicans when gas prices spiked during the summer of 2008. For 2 years prior, congressional Democrats were following a green energy plan only, doing their best to completely eliminate the traditional forms of energy like petroleum, natural gas, and coal that account for 83% of our energy consumption. When President Obama took office in 2009, he took up their flag and began pushing for his controversial cap-and-trade law that even he admitted would mean electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. He appointed an energy secretary that admitted on national TV that he wanted our gas prices at European levels. Well, they're both on their way. Since then, energy costs have doubled, gas prices have skyrocketed, and we are in a crisis in this country when it comes to our energy use. Just as we saw in the summer of 2008, when these gasoline prices spiked and our energy costs rose, the price of everything else was soon to follow. When his cap-and-trade bill failed and didn't get enough support in a Democratic-controlled Congress, he set out to have the EPA basically regulate the bill into law. Over the last 3 years, the EPA has issued some of the most costly regulation on power plants in their history. By 2016, the utility MAC regulation is expected to cost $9.6 billion annually in direct costs, and some analysts estimate its total indirect costs closer to $100 billion. The cross-state air pollution rule is expected to impact over 1,000 power plants across the country, and by the EPA's own estimates, it's estimated to cost $2.8 billion annually. With no business experience in this administration, I don't think that they realize when the cost of doing business goes up, business prices go up, and that affects every hard-working American taxpayer at the pump, when he turns on a light at home, when he buys a loaf of bread, when he goes to buy a U.S. manufactured product. It costs. According to the President's own Commerce Department, the Boiler MAC regulation in itself is expected to cost between 40,000 and 60,000 jobs. The impact of these regulations is already being felt. Last month, 2 utility companies announced the closing of 10 of their power plants as a direct result of some of the strict new regulations. Another move that will raise the price of electricity for consumers. Yes, it seemed as though the President had finally come around when he said in his State of the Union speech earlier this year, right here in this room, this country needs an all-out, all-of-the-above energy strategy that develops every available resource of American energy. It's not often that I agree with the President, but at that point I did. Unfortunately, the President hasn't stayed true to his words. In fact, just yesterday, the EPA announced their latest set of regulations that will effectively ban the building of new coal-fired power plants by dramatically decreasing carbon dioxide emissions. Whether the President and environmentalists like it or not, coal currently amounts for almost half of the electricity generated in this country. Effectively eliminating coal-fired plants is only going to increase the cost of electricity to American families. We can no longer allow the White House to say one thing and do another when it comes to energy. If the President truly supports the Republican all-of-the-above energy strategy, as he claimed he did, then he needs to follow through. It's time we start to take advantage of all the God-given natural resources this country has and to have American-made energy, American-made power that will power this nation. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Yields back the balance of his time. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the situation in Afghanistan is as bleak as I can remember at any point in the last 10.5 years that we've been at war. In recent months, we've seen the burning of the Koran by American troops, a video of soldiers urinating on bodies of dead Afghans, spontaneous riots in the Afghan streets protesting the continued U.S. occupation, as well as deadly attacks by Afghan soldiers on the U.S. and NATO forces that are there to help and to train them. And now, in the most grotesque tragedy imaginable, 2 weeks ago, a U.S. staff sergeant left his base, walked more than a mile to an Afghan village outside Kandahar, going door to door and systematically gunning down 17 civilians. The New York Times reported that one Afghan farmer was visiting a nearby town for the day and returned home to find that his wife, 4 sons, and 4 daughters had all been murdered in the attack. And here's the irony. According to the Times account, because the Taliban still lingered in the area, the farmer had been concerned about moving his family back to this part of southern Afghanistan last year. But he was reassured by the very fact that he would be near an American military base. With these latest atrocities, how can we expect President Karzai, a reluctant ally under the best of circumstances, to continue to cooperate? How do we expect to convince the Taliban to come to the negotiating table for a peace and reconciliation settlement? And most importantly, after this incident, how do we convince the people of Afghanistan that we are their friends, that our presence in their country is a force for good? Staff Sergeant Robert Bales will be tried for these unspeakable crimes. But I also think any responsible analysis would conclude that he is also a victim of the war. He was on his 4th deployment. He clearly suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder or even worse mental health affliction. He clearly had no business being on active duty. Mr. Speaker, more than a decade of war is weakening and wreaking havoc with the bodies and minds of our service members. Staff Sergeant Bales will be held to account, but what about the cruel and unforgiving war machine that absolutely has to bear some responsibility? When are we going to finally set warfare aside and embrace a smart security approach? Yesterday, 80 retired top military leaders took out an ad in Politico calling for robust investment in development, diplomacy, and other civilian efforts that will do a lot more than military force to keep America safe. And yet, the Republican budget we'll debate later today cuts those very foreign aid and humanitarian programs. When will we learn, Mr. Speaker? How bad does it have to get? Our Afghanistan policy is an absolute shambles, and the American people know it. The latest polling shows more than two-thirds, 69%, believe we shouldn't be waging this war. This is the moment. We must realize that this mission has no hope of succeeding, that the only humane and responsible course is to end the war at once. This is the moment. Finally, after all the tragedy and mayhem, to bring our troops home. I yield back.
The lady yields back the balance of her time. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spears, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again to highlight the epidemic of sexual assault and rape in the military. Next week will mark the one-year anniversary of my first floor speech on this issue. That day, I told the story of Technical Sergeant Mary Gallagher, who was raped by a co-worker while deployed in Iraq. The week leading up to the rape, Sergeant Gallagher's assailant harassed her, stalked her, and attempted to break into her room. Though she twice reported the assailant's threatening behavior, her command did nothing about it. They called it a, quote, he said, she said scenario. Justice was not served. I've told the story of Army Specialist Blake Stevens, who was consistently assaulted and sexually harassed by the men in his unit. He reported the harassment to command, but no action was taken. Fellow service members later sodomized him with a bottle, and the only punishment his assailants received was extra push-ups. Justice was not served. Last week, I told the story of Marine Lieutenant Ellie Halmer, who reported repeated sexual harassment by superiors to no avail. The Marine Corps did absolutely nothing in response to the harassment. Lieutenant Helmer was later raped by another superior whose behavior went unpunished. Her command ultimately told her, quote, you're tough. You need to pick yourself up and dust yourself off. I can't babysit you all of the time. Quote, no justice was served. Mary, Blake, and Ellie, like so many victims I've heard from, paint a picture of a military culture that treats sexual harassment and assault with silent acceptance, a culture that punishes victims for reporting the crimes committed against them. The military refutes this, yet evidence suggests just the reverse. The, quote, hurt feelings report that stands beside me is a repugnant example of how rape and sexual assault has been trivialized and how a victim was mocked in the military. It was supposed to be satire. The, quote, report was posted on the Facebook page of a female captain in charge of the Marine Barracks Protocol Office just a few months ago. It mocks fellow Marines who file sexual assault complaints with a list of, quote, reasons for filing this report, which include options such as, quote, I'm a little B blank, I'm a little, quote, P blank, I'm a crybaby, and I want my mommy. And what did the head of protocol do when she saw this document? Did she report or punish the people who made it? Did she tell them there is zero tolerance for this behavior? No, she didn't do anything of the sort. In fact, the head of protocol wrote this caption to the image on her Facebook page, quote, my Marines crack me up, unquote. It's no wonder that only 13% of victims of rape and assault are brave enough to report the crimes committed against them. The hurt feelings report and the Facebook response convey a toxic culture when it comes to sexual harassment, assault, stalking, and rape. Victims have been told to, quote, get over it, or told that they were, quote, asking for it based on the way they dress. 1 year ago, I promised to tell the stories of service members who survived rape and sexual assault while in the military. I said then, and I promise you now, that I will tell their stories until meaningful action is taken to eliminate the chasm between the number of estimated sexual assaults and the number of prosecuted sexual assaults. I urge survivors to email me at stopmilitaryrape@mail.house.gov if they want to speak up. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the death of Trayvon Martin is indeed an American tragedy. Too often, this violent act that resulted in the murder of Trayvon Martin is repeated in the streets of our nation. I applaud the young people all across the land who are making a statement about hoodies, about the real hoodlums in this nation, particularly those who tread on our laws wearing official or quasi-official clothes. Racial profiling has to stop, Mr. Speaker. Just because someone wears a hoodie does not make them a hoodlum. The Bible teaches us, Mr. Speaker, in the book of Micah 6:6-8,
the member will suspend.
These words,
the member will
these words, he has shown you, O man,
the member will suspend.
Good,
the chair must remind members of Clause 5
what does the Lord
of Rule
require
17,
you but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And in the New Testament, Luke 4:18-20 teaches us these words. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and the recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free. I urge all who hear these words to heed these lessons. May God bless Trayvon Martin's soul, his family.
The member is no longer recognized. The chair will ask the Sergeant-at-Arms to enforce the prohibition on decor. The chair must remind members that Clause 5 of Rule 17 prohibits the wearing of hats in the chamber when the House is in session. The chair finds that the donning of a hood is not consistent with this rule. Members need to remove their hoods or leave the floor. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Lewis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, America has the best health care system in the world. Long before coming to Congress, I spent my energy in the life and health insurance business. In selling individual contracts, I found that questions of pre-existing conditions and portability were a major concern for people buying individual health insurance contracts. Over the years, I became convinced that these two major challenges could be solved by breaking down the walls between the individual states. This would provide a much larger pool of applicants, thus allowing for a much more reasonable base to underwrite the cost of covering those pre-existing conditions and allowing for more effective portability. When we debated how to solve the problems affecting our health care system 2 years ago, many were warned that government would go too far and must not be the solution. Our former speaker said, and I quote, we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it. Well, now we know what is in it, and it's time to speak up. Mr. and Mrs. America, do not allow a federally mandated program to undermine the best health care system in the world. Do not allow a federal mandate to get between you and your physician. Do not allow government to undermine your right to choose between the great variety of protection available in the marketplace. Do not allow a politically appointed board to ration health care in the name of reducing cost. Do not allow the federal government to take us down the pathway to socialized medicine. Do not allow us to be dominated by those who would have America look more and more like Europe. So, Mr. and Mrs. America, it's time for all of us to come together. We can solve the problems of our existing health care system without allowing a bunch of unelected bureaucrats getting between you and great health care. You need to tell Congress to do their job, solve the problems without destroying the best health care system in the world. Now yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares that the House is in recess until noon today.